Hello everybody and welcome back, and today I'm going to be doing a match analysis for replay sent in by captaingzer0x's. Now, this particular replay for Captain G features him playing a Fletcher that he set up in a way that is a little bit different than how you typically see Fletcher set up. And how captaingzer0x has done it is he's actually equipped the defensive AA fire consumable on it, which is an interesting choice because it does allow the Fletcher to offer a certain amount of protection against enemy air attacks, whether that is defensively for yourself or against enemy aircraft when they're coming to attack your carrier. So there is a little bit of an escort ability there. So for the first roughly just over 5 minutes, captaingzer0x offers some sort of early protection for the two carriers until they can get together and he moves off. So that raises actually a pretty interesting question. Is it actually valuable to have a Fletcher protect CVs while equipping a defensive AA fire ability or not? And I have to say I'm a little bit mixed on this particular action at the early stages of the game. As a CV, I would say I would love an escort, but on the flip side, a Fletcher isn't really going to be providing all that much protection against two Lexingtons. Now, if the enemy team had two Shokakus, I could see the benefit of having a Fletcher there just because the defensive AA fire can spread out torpedoes and massively spread out the dive bombers. But for the US carriers, it's not going to have all that much of an effect. So I think in this particular situation where it's two US CVs on the other side, I don't really see that benefit of sitting back and escorting CVs while essentially spending a good 6 minutes out of the action as a tier 9 destroyer. Because again, if it's a 3-cap domination map like this one is, the destroyer's role to cap, to prevent cap, to engage the enemy destroyers is a really, really big role. And if you are not really there to provide support for your team, it's very hard for your team sometimes to do certain things. So I do have to say, in this particular battle, I think the carrier escort was a bit of a waste of time and probably shouldn't have been done. However, that's not to say that, if you're playing an A mode destroyer, that's a complete pointless thing to try and escort your carriers. If you run into an enemy team that has two Japanese carriers, then the defensive AA fire will have a lot more effect when dispersing bombs and dispersing torpedoes. So I think if you were up against the Japanese carriers, it's something worthwhile to do. If you're against American carriers, just go do what a destroyer is supposed to do in terms of capping and spotting. Still, Captain does manage to make it to roughly where the B cap is, and does manage to kill the Pensacola on the enemy team with a pretty nice salvo of torpedoes, although the Pensacola was a little bit just kind of potato, didn't really do any sort of evasive maneuver there until the very last second, which was too late. One thing to point out here, against a rune at 5 kilometers in a Fletcher, you totally could have gone with armor piercing when the rune was giving you a broadside, as the 127mm AP at this particular range is able to actually go through the armor and potentially have maybe netted you a few Citadel hits. So that's something to definitely consider in the future instead of just firing away with HE. Nevertheless, Captain does do a pretty solid job of staying in the smoke, continuing to fire away at the rune, and pushing the rune off of cap, thereby keeping B cap secure for his team for a little bit longer. If you take a look at the way the map is right now, the enemy team are mostly heading for Charlie, and so the most logical thing to do right now is to actually head for Alpha. Two enemy destroyers are actually all the way over on the 10 line, so they're not really going to pop up and present any sort of major, sort of surprise threat to Captain. So Captain is going to head over to A because one of Captain's teammates actually pinged the A cap on the map and essentially typed in chat to go cap A, which Captain acknowledges with the affirmative quick chat command and heads over to actually grab the cap. So at this particular moment, this battle is actually in terms of ship advantage, still in favor of the enemy team. However, in terms of points advantage and cap advantage, it continues to stay with captain's team as they continue to maintain sort of 2 caps, while the enemy team will continue to only have 1. Alright, so now that that's all out of the way, I want to go quickly back to something I was talking about earlier. The A destroyer with the defensive A consumable. What else could it be useful for? And I think the AA destroyer configuration, the one with the defensive AA fire, I think that would actually be quite viable for battleship escort. So assuming you're in a destroyer and the biggest enemies of battleships today is other destroyers, you could, 1, offer spotting, and 2, because you're small enough, nimble enough, and fast enough, in the event that you see planes, you can react quickly, get back to position for the battleships, give them that defensive AA fire, and then head back out to engage destroyers again. So I think the destroyer with the AA setup is, I think, ideal escort for either a carrier against a Japanese carrier or for battleships, as you can provide both anti-air and anti-destroyer. So I think that is something to also keep in mind as well. Anyways, there's an enemy Iowa, approximately 13.5 kilometers away, and Captain fires a widespread, a single widespread at that Iowa, and then fires his guns. Yeah, I'm not really sure that was a very productive thing to do, to be honest. By firing your guns, you signal to the Iowa that, look, there's a destroyer here. So in a way, you've sort of told the Iowa where you are, and because you fired your guns, the Iowa also momentarily spots you as you come in. So in that way, the Iowa knows that you're already here, and so your torpedo attacks won't really be a surprise. One thing you generally should do is keep in mind the weaknesses of certain ships. So for the Iowa, it's a rather sluggish rudder, and the turn radius isn't that amazing. So had you saved both salvos or torpedoes, wait until you got into a more lethal range, and then dumped them both, you would have probably caught the Iowa in a much more lethal torpedo salvo. And another thing, of course, is not to actually get into your detection range, because once you're detected and the Iowa sees you, the Iowa is immediately going to assume that, okay, you've probably fired off some torpedoes, and is probably going to turn bow into your direction, and thereby you're probably going to miss, even if you launch both sets, probably would have missed if you aimed it at the prediction indicator. So again, if you aren't detected, you probably would fire around the prediction indicator, accounting for a potential last-second turn. If you're firing against an Iowa that has spotted you, of course you're going to be firing where you know the Iowa will be. Another reason I sort of pointed out that getting spotted by the Iowa was a misplay is because it forces you into this kind of position where you've had to deploy smoke. You don't actually see the battleship until the battleship gets close or your smoke starts to dissipate. And you're sort of in this very awkward position as a destroyer. Like, yes, you have 1 salvo of torpedoes, but with the cruiser that was there, it's going to be very hard to just outright YOLO rush into the battleship. Right there as well, don't fire at the indicator. Like, I know it's really tempting to spot the Iowa and it's so close and you just immediately go with torpedoes. It is very tempting to do that, but it's oftentimes a better idea to just give it like that half second, quickly see what the Iowa was actually doing, like what's your indicator showing you, is there a turn happening, is he going straight, and then make a launch based on a prediction that the Iowa is going to do something because he knows he spotted you and he knows that your torpedoes are going to be coming his way. So again, you have to factor that kind of stuff in when you are playing a destroyer and you're trying to launch torpedoes against a battleship that's close. And I know it's a mistake that everybody makes. I still make it from time to time where, oh my god, you get super excited and you just, want to fire torpedoes. But the thing about getting spotted and having that range closed down and then you having to sit in your own smoke is you do make it rather easy for enemy ships to know exactly where you are and to come and get you. So that is the reason why when you were in that situation earlier alone against like cruiser and battleship, it would have been better just to stay invisible and try to get off torpedo salvos at outside of your detection range, as the Fletcher is capable of doing that. Alright, so Captain, at this particular point in time, because the enemy has taken B cap and there's no way for him to really go and contest it, so he goes after the enemy team's Lexington, which is It's not a bad decision, and the reason why it's not a bad decision is because your team is now up on points, and you've just got that torpedo hit and sunk cruiser, so there is a sizable points advantage. And I think with a sizable points advantage, oh, there's another torpedo hit, and that I was really low. So in this kind of a situation, I would say the carrier is a viable target to go after. However, if you didn't kill the Pensacola and you didn't really damage the Iowa, then I think it becomes a little bit of a coin toss. You could go and kill the Lexington because it does give you a sizable chunk of points, and it grants your team air superiority to deal with the enemy team's remaining ships, which is a Colorado, a Rune, and 2 destroyers. And that's not really all that hard for 2 carriers to manage. So, you know, you could definitely go and kill this Lexington and, you know, let your team do the rest. Or you could try to go for a more assured kind of win, which is to just go and cap C. And as long as you can grab another cap, it's pretty easy victory for your team, assuming that they are able to do their job. Because if you do look at the remaining ships on Captain's team, 2 Iowas and 2 CVs, they're really going to be able to hold their own, generally speaking, except against the 2 destroyers who, well, last spotted they were on the 10 line, so they're not really going to be getting into action against the ships on the 1-2 line really anytime soon, even if they were going across the map right now at top speed. But at least going back to the decision that Captain made, which was to go after Lexington, it's okay in this situation. I think it's actually a solid choice to go after him. And of course, he actually does bag himself the kill, although that first torpedo salvo could have been a narrow spread. Once again, understand the ships you're playing against. I think that's a really important thing, right? Like the Lexington is a carrier, so another slow rudder, really big ship that doesn't turn well. So you could just aim for like max damage on that lone torpedo salvo and might have just killed that carrier on that first salvo. Still, I do like how you saved the second salvo for, you know, in case the first one wasn't enough, and then you were able to get off this salvo, which does seal the Lexington's fate. Overall, I think it was a solid battle. You did many things right, although there are a few things I think you should reconsider, like escorting carriers depending on the circumstances of the battle, and also, you know, priority targets for escort, maybe like battleships, and then also the decision about when to stay stealthed and when to actually go loud with your guns. Hope this analysis has helped you analyze your own play, and maybe you've picked up a few things here and there. Anyways, folks, so that's all for today. I hope you all have a good one. Take care, and I'll talk to all of you again soon.